Over £100 billion of taxpayers' money has been wasted on fraud, on project failure, on inefficiency. So not only are they taking more money from us than ever before, they're not looking after it very well. And then people are experiencing poor public services.
So it looks like we're going to be getting a lot of tax cuts in this autumn statement this week, Darren Jones. Will Labour welcome a cut in income tax?
Well, look, the first thing to say is who knows what tax cut we're going to be getting, if any, on Wednesday. The Conservatives seem to have aired, 4 or 5 different options in the press over the preceding couple of weeks. And so we're going to have to wait and see what they say on Wednesday. But Labour has been saying now for some time that if it's affordable, and the Chancellor will need to show where he gets the money from, of course, we would like to see taxes on working people come down, because after 25 Tory tax rises in this Parliament, the tax burden's higher than it has been since the Second World War.
What about a cut in inheritance tax?
Well, again, we'll have to wait to see what the Chancellor says on Wednesday. It's reported on the front pages of the newspapers today that he's U-turned on his own pre-announcement on inheritance tax. We can only assume, given the amount of press coverage, that it was happening, that maybe it will happen. We'll have to wait and see. The key thing on inheritance tax is that very, very few people pay it. Of course, we understand that people want to pass on their property and any money they might have to their kids. Of course, we all want to do that. But for a couple passing on things to their children, you have to have over £1 million in assets and values in order to pay inheritance tax. That's why fewer than 4% of estates in the country pay it. And if the Chancellor does go ahead with this cut in inheritance tax, we will expect the Conservative Party to set out how it's affording to pay for it and what the consequences of that decision are.
It sounds to me, though, like you're not automatically opposed to cutting and focusing on inheritance tax, that you can see some of the arguments in favour of reducing it.
Well, I'm not either for or against any speculation on tax changes, because I have to see what the whole package looks like on Wednesday, because we know from Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's period in office that if you announce unfunded tax cuts, that has huge implications on the economy and on the market here in the UK. So we really will just have to wait to see what they say on Wednesday. But as I say, Rachel Reeves, the Labour Party, have been clear for some time now that if we can afford it, we do, of course, want to see taxes on working people come down, because they're the highest they have been since the Second World War.
What about the overall tax take, though? I mean, there is a philosophical question here, isn't there? Conservatives are quite clear that they think they want a low tax economy. Does Labour?
Well, I mean, you talk to any Conservative MPs, they're pretty grumpy, because we've ended up in a high tax, high debt economy. The amount of money that the Chancellor's taking off all of us is huge in comparison to the past. And people will be saying, never have I paid so much and got so little.
Yeah, but you know, in comparison to European neighbours, for example, it's not excessively high. And many of those have centre-left governments, and they would say, actually, if you want to have European levels of public services, which apparently we do, we need to have European levels of taxation.
Well, that's why the question that's really important to ask is, what are we getting for handing over all this money to the Conservative Party in government? I mean, people look at the schools, the police, National Health Service, and think that those services are on their knees. And yet we've seen our tax go up and up and up under the Conservatives. And not just that, we've seen today on the front page of some of the newspapers, the amount of waste that has been coming out of the government. Over £100 billion of taxpayers' money has been wasted on fraud, on project failure, on inefficiency. So not only are they taking more money from us than ever before, they're not looking after it very well. And then people are experiencing poor public services. I do just think you can run the country and the economy better than that, which is what the Labour Party is offering.
Yeah, so I mean, let's be clear about this, because you're not really answering my question. What you're saying is that you can make efficiency savings, you can run things more efficient and have tax cuts. Is that what you're saying in the terms of the overall burden?
Well, the next election will either be in May or October next year. We've got the autumn statement on Wednesday. We'll probably have another budget in March.
Yeah, but look, people are looking at the opinion polls. They're seeing the likelihood is there's going to be a Labour government. I don't think it's unreasonable to know what your philosophical position is on taxation and the level of the tax burden.
Sure, but there's a philosophical question, and then there's an accounting question. And what I can't do today is tell you what the books are going to look like at the point at which the next election is called. And that's why I won't be setting out, in interviews in the run up to that period, what our final decisions will be in that manifesto. But we've been very clear that we do want tax on working people to come down when we can afford to do that. Our focus has been absolutely centered on getting the economy growing, because we know that improves tax revenue and gets people's pay improving, and that will help us to be able to do that. But we've also been absolutely focused on how we reduce the cost of living for people with our energy announcements, our home installation announcements, the house building announcements, as well as having to reform our public services. Because
do you think there needs to be more incentives in the benefits in the tax system to get people into work?
Well, we know that since COVID, there are more people out of work than there were before COVID. And we know there's more work to be done, primarily through helping people through their health problems, because we've got this huge backlog in the National Health Service of getting people back to work who can get back to work. That's why we've announced that we would change the non-dom tax status in order to raise over £1 billion to deal with the backlog in the National Health Service, so that we can help people get back into work where we know there are vacancies that can be filled, and that will be good for the economy as well as for those people who will be back in work.
Do you feel under threat because you didn't vote for a ceasefire over Israel and Gaza?
I don't know. I don't feel under threat. I don't quite understand the question, if I'm honest. I mean,
well, we know that constituency offices of some Labour MPs have been attacked. We know that Michael Gove has said that he has security concerns. I mean, a lot of your colleagues who have stayed loyal to Keir Starmer's position do appear to be coming under quite a lot of duress and genuine threat.
I see. Forgive me. I didn't understand the question, because I've not had any particular problems locally here in Bristol, but I've seen what other colleagues have faced, not just within the Labour Party, in fact, but in other parties as well. Look, MPs should be able to go about their business without feeling intimidated or threatened. Always in politics, people have different views, and sometimes there are difficult decisions to be made. Sometimes, as was the case for the vote this week, as I found with some constituents, you have to explain some of the processes in Parliament and what they actually mean in the real world. And once you've done that, people understand the situation better. But under no circumstances should people be intimidating or threatening MPs or vandalising their offices. That's a criminal offence, and that's not the way our democracy should work.
You say you had to explain to some of your constituents the processes in Parliament, which I think is a polite way of you saying that you had to point out that the vote was rather irrelevant because it was a non-binding opposition day vote that wasn't going to make any difference. But there are things that Keir Starmer can do to make a difference in this conflict. Would you like to hear more from him that's critical, or at least holding the Israeli government to account, not just in terms of the way it targets its operation in Gaza, but also perhaps its response to settlers in the West Bank, for instance?
I mean, there are a whole host of issues that could be discussed. The first thing I'd say is it's very hard to do that on an ongoing basis in TV interviews and social media. Here in the United Kingdom, we're not on the ground there. There are agencies and others that have to verify information as we see it, primarily on social media here in the UK. And it's not appropriate for politicians to be commentators about ongoing daily situations when they don't perhaps know the validity of the information they're getting. But look, Keir Starmer has approached this issue from the position of asking himself, what would he be doing if he was Prime Minister right now? And as the leader of the opposition, that's the right thing to do, because what is actually happening is that our diplomats are working with their counterparts, with our allies in places like the United States and the European Union and elsewhere, to collectively try to support a process that leads to peace, so that you can return to a political dialogue about a two-state solution. And the fact of the matter is Britain has limited influence directly in that process, but collectively with our allies, not just on aid and trying to get people out of Gaza, where we've made some progress, but more needs to be done, but in trying to get to a position where the fighting can stop. That's a complex, it's a difficult, and it's going to be a time-consuming process. That should happen properly alongside our partners, without it becoming a kind of party political argument, which is what's happened this week. And I have to say that when you then explain that to people who have personal connections to the region, it actually belittles the situation happening in the Middle East. I think we should all be focused on how we support the British government, quite frankly, and our allies to try to support the region to get to a position of peace.
Now, on a different topic, on Rwanda, the government is going to be bringing forward emergency legislation in the coming days or weeks, and a treaty to try to, I suppose, unilaterally declare its Rwanda policy to be safe and lawful. Do you understand why ministers are pursuing this? Because voters are very upset. A lot of your voters are very upset about the sight of still small boat crossings in the channel and people being put into hotel accommodation when they get here.
Yeah, so it's a problem that needs tackling, not least because we understand a lot of it is through organized crime, which of course you don't want to be happening, especially when it results in victims being subject to that. But the Rwanda policy deals with a very, very small number. I think it's 100 or so people in relation to thousands and thousands of asylum seekers. It doesn't get to the root cause of the problem. And so, the government's decided to pursue it, even though the court has said that its original proposals were illegal. We'll have to see what the legislation looks like when they present it to us. It's got to get through the House of Commons and the House of Lords, of course, and see whether that has any effect. I mean, to be honest, I'm a bit dubious at this stage that it will achieve anything, but the government has said it wants to try, and we'll consider the detail when they publish it.
Mr. Jones, thank you very much indeed for joining us.